session on NEC3 option B. I will say it is a little bit of a tricky subject, and certainly over the weekend I was doing some scratching of my head trying to work out how this will work in practice as well. So hopefully by the end of the session today, you will be very clear on how you're going to get paid in terms of remeasures and also in terms of compensation events as well. As is normal for these particular presentations, the first few slides in the bundle are a little bit about the company I work for. So we provide support to engineering and construction industries effectively from cradle to grave. And you can see some very, very nice, colourful pictures there on the screen in front of you. We are a market leader in areas such as expert witness, planning, commercial. Very importantly, dispute avoidance. So the whole aim of all of the sessions that I've done for Seeker is that you can see the pitfalls that occur and you then know how to deal with them. Of course, if issues do arise and you are in a dispute situation, we would be absolutely delighted to help. In terms of the background of the company, we were established in 1978. We are stock market listed with over 500 staff worldwide. We have a network of offices throughout the UK, and as it stands at the moment, I am sat here in sunny Hooton in our Cheshire office. Three parts of the business. We have on the left-hand side, driver project services, and essentially we can provide quantity surveyors, planners, project managers onto your live projects. In the middle is the organisation that I work for, which is Driver Tret, and we provide contract advisory services, commercial and contract management, planning, programming and scheduling, as well as dispute resolution services. Finally, on the right-hand side there, you can see Dialis, which is our expert witness division, and we can provide experts on quantum, delay, and a growing part of the business is our technical experts who sit in areas such as architecture, engineering, or M&E. As well as that, we can also provide adjudicators, arbitrators, and mediators who actually will look at the disputes between two separate parties. Twice a year, we produce our digest magazine. You can get that via our internet, or you can actually email our marketing department. And we've got one of those fancy QR codes, which will take you to the latest version as well. A little bit about me. I'm sure that I am in very good company today. I'm sure there are some other quantity surveyors who are hurraying as we speak. I am chartered, being a member of the RICS. I'm ex-Balfour Beatty, having worked for them for over 5 years as a site quantity surveyor. Completed my law degree in 2002 and have also done my solicitor's exams, but made a conscious decision to stay in construction claims consultancy, where I've now been for over 20 years. So the main event, the NEC3 option B. Let's start off in a very easy way and just a little bit on the background. Of course, NEC option B is one of 6 of the main contract options. In terms of popularity, I would say probably top of the pile in terms of popularity is option A, closely followed by option C, and actually NEC option B is probably third on the list. I'm sure the vast majority of those on today's seminar are well aware of those options A to F. And again, this is straightforward information as well. Each option uses different arrangements for payment to the contractor because, of course, each of these options allocates risk differently between the employer and the contractor. The risk allocation is very, very different between the various options. So the priced options, which are classed as A and B, where the contractor is taking a greater risk, versus the cost reimbursable option, option E. Having said that, and the fact that the contracts are very, very different, what is very important to remember is that you have a series of core clauses which are common to all of the options, and then depending on which A, B, C, D, E or F you're on, you then have some main option clauses which are added in. I will say that for those of you who aren't dealing with the NEC contract on a regular basis, these option clauses are easy to miss. So very roughly, the core clauses are about 50 pages. The option clauses for option B, it's only an additional 2 pages, but that really is what puts the icing on the cake or the tweak in relation to how the contract will operate. If you look at the NEC website itself, you'll see that the NEC option B is described as being a priced contract with a bill of quantities where the risk of carrying out the work at agreed prices is taken by the contractor. If you're working on an NEC contract, I would highly recommend that you have your own copy of the guidance notes. Definitely a document that I would refer to regularly when I get queries as well. So, in relation to the guidance notes, it does give you some helpful information as well. It talks about the bill of quantities comprising a list of work items and quantities. It is prepared by or for the employer. Standard methods of measurement are published which state the items to be included and how the quantities are to be measured and calculated. And I'm sure that you've all come across whether it's SESM, SMM, NRM, or of course there's also a rail version as a method of measurement as well. Again, from the NEC guidance notes, the tenderers price these items, taking account of the information in the tender documents and including for all matters which are at the contractor's risk. The employer then pays for those items or the work done on the basis of actual measurement of those items with quantities. Now, that actual measurement thing is something that we are going to talk about quite a bit for the rest of the session. It is important, though, to remember that contract data part 1 and part 2 also help us to set the scene as well. So if I was to take contract data part 1, particularly in relation to what we're going to be talking about today, right at the start of contract data part 1, you can see written there, the conditions of contract are the core clauses, exactly what I mentioned a few minutes ago, and the clauses for main option. And of course, in our example, it will be main option B will be inserted there. The dispute resolution option, of course, are the W's, and then you've got the X's, Y's, and Z's for the secondary options. It goes on to say, again, still in contract data part 1, that the method of measurement is, and we're expecting that to be filled in. And it does give a little bit of an option here, amended as follows. So the method of measurement might be the standard SESM, SMM, NRM, or the rail version. And they might have actually what we used to call in the olden days preambles. So, in other words, there are specific reasons why they haven't followed parts of the method of measurement stated. So, as background, it's vitally important that you make sure that you do understand what the method of measurement is and whether there are any amendments. Now, of course, contract data part 1 is the document that the employer puts forward. And at tender stage, it's the contractor that fills in contract data part 2 as part of their tender proposal. And the important bits that we can see here from contract data part 2 for today's session, firstly, it says if option B or D is used, then the bill of quantities is, and what they're expecting to be filled in there is contained in Appendix F or document reference ABC123. So we're looking here for a specific document. Just below that, it says if option A, B, C, or D is used, the tendered total of the prices is, and here we're expecting a figure, so £60,000, £2 million, or whatever. And that, in relation to option B, is going to be the total of the bill of quantities. So the tendered total of the prices for option B will be the total of the bill of quantities that's contained in the contract. The monthly valuation is different under each of the options, but we do start with a core clause, and here it's 50.2. And core clause 50.2 says that the amount due, obviously on a monthly basis, is the price for the work done to date, which you will see referred to in my notes and elsewhere as the PWDD. Other amounts to be paid to the contractor. So obviously we are thinking remeasures and compensation events, and then less amounts to be paid by or retained from the contractor. And probably the easiest example of that, of course, is delay damages. So that's also a good starting point in relation to, well, what are you going to do each month? Core clause 50.2 is the starting point. Well, I've mentioned price for the work done to date, but actually, what is that? And option B has its own main option clause to define what the price for the work done to date is. And in this case, it is the total of the quantity of the work which the contractor has completed for each item in the bill of quantities multiplied by the rate, and a proportion of each lump sum, which is the proportion of work covered by the item which the contractor has completed. Completed work is work without defects, which would either delay or be covered by immediately following work. Now, breaking this down, if I look at bullet point 1, the quantity of work which the contractor has completed for each item in the bill, have a look at the wording in red as an example. In month 3, the contractor has completed 15 meters squared, it should say, of Indian stone paving, but the bill of quantities only measures 10 square meters. What is the contractor entitled to be paid? Well, if you look at that first bullet point, it's whatever work the contractor has completed. The fact that the bill of quantities, and I'm talking here about the original bill of quantities, only measures 10, well, it doesn't say in bullet point 1 that it's capped at the original quantity in the bill. So my view on that question is that the contractor is clearly entitled to be paid for the 15 square meters actually completed. And this really is the starting point for the conversation on the valuation under option B. So if nothing else happens on the project apart from that the quantities change in a small way, then all that happens in terms of the project on a monthly basis for valuation is the contractor is paid the work that they are done, that they have actually finished, whether it's higher or lower than what's in the bill. And we don't actually get into any conversations at all about compensation events. So for each item that we're going to talk about today, the question that I want you to be going through your heads effectively is this just a straightforward remeasure item that's covered by the price for the work done to date on a remeasure basis? Or is it a little bit more exciting than that? Is it also a compensation event? And we're going to look at how the contract deals with the compensation event side. But the starting point is always, is this just a remeasure, or is it also a compensation event? So the relevant clauses then, which are going to give us the answers to whether it is or it isn't a compensation event. Whenever we're looking at NEC, these definition clauses are always very, very important. And again, these are particular to option B. So 11.221 states, the bill of quantities is the bill of quantities as changed in accordance with this contract to accommodate implemented compensation events and for accepted quotations for acceleration. Well, I've just written down here that I absolutely agree that this is a bit poor in terms of the drafting. To have a capitalised term and then without capitals, the bill of quantities is the bill of quantities. I can only just think about Brexit means Brexit and other typical type phrases. For me, it's very disappointing that we haven't got a better definition of that. My view, if I was actually looking at redrafting this, I would actually have a definition of the contract bill of quantities or the original bill of quantities, which then refers straight back to the document reference from contract data part 2. And then separately, I would have a final bill of quantities to differentiate between the two. Also, this particular definition talks about the bill of quantities being changed in accordance with this contract. And I think there's another trick missed here, because it should also say as changed in accordance with this contract to accommodate remeasures and to accommodate implemented compensation events. So it isn't 100% clear from this particular definition, and it could be better as far as I'm concerned. 11.222 on defined cost. Right, it is hugely important to understand the definition of defined cost under whatever option that you're working under, and importantly to recognise that it means different things in different options as well. I did find a very good quote in relation to defined cost, which I'll just read out to you. This was a project manager that was being interviewed, and I would guess it's a project manager who thinks he knows his stuff, but maybe doesn't think other people also know their stuff. The quote is this: in relation to defined cost, he said, "They haven't got a clue what it means. 99% of users don't even know that the term defined cost exists, let alone what it actually means." Well, certainly by the end of the session today, I would hope that you are all absolutely clear about what defined cost is, and importantly, under option B, when you use it. So we have the definition here that defined cost is the cost of components in the shorter schedule of cost components, whether the work is subcontracted or not, excluding the cost of preparing quotations for compensation events. And again, I'd probably be a bit critical of this as well, because all it's saying is that defined cost is whatever the shorter schedule of cost components says it is. So it's a definition that just refers to another document. And really, from these two, I actually don't think we're too much the wiser at the moment. However, they form part of the overall picture here. We then move swiftly along to clause 60.4. And we're going to go through 60.4, 5, and 6. And I think I've also written down and 7 as well, because this is where we are very clear on what is or isn't a compensation event. So remember, it could be that all you're doing is a remeasure and it's not a CE, unless it comes under the following categories. So 60.4 is the starting point. A difference between the final total quantity of work done and the quantity stated for an item in the bill of quantities is a compensation event if, first bullet point, the difference does not result from a change to the works information, because of course a change to the works information is a compensation event in its own right under 60.1 brackets 1. Okay, so that just comes under a separate heading. 2, the difference causes the defined cost per unit of quantity to change, and the rates in the bill of quantities for the item multiplied by the final total of quantity of work done is more than 0.5% of the total of the prices at the contract date. Now, to put that third bullet point into context, if your job is worth £5 million, then this item in the bill of quantities has got to be worth more than £25,000. And actually, there wouldn't be that many items in the bill that would actually meet that third criteria. Remember, you have to meet all three because of that word "and." So you're comparing here the original quantity with the final quantity. I did see a rather nasty Z clause quite recently where they had changed the 0.5% to read 5%. So on a £5 million job, that particular single item would then have to be worth more than £250,000. So essentially, it actually negated the whole reasoning behind 60.4. This clause simply didn't work at all for the contractor. So watch out for little cheeky tweaks or Z clauses on that percentage as well. So that's the first example of when a remeasure is also a compensation event. 60.5, you'll be pleased to know, is a much easier one. This states a difference between the final total quantity of work done and the quantity for an item stated in the bill of quantities, which delays completion or the meeting of conditions stated for a key date, is a compensation event. So all you have to have here is that the original quantity and the final quantity are different. It could be 1 square meter, 1 meter cube difference, and that would be enough to tip you into the CE category if it also delays completion. So 60.5 is a straightforward one. 60.6 feels to me like the typical turkey voting for Christmas. So it says the project manager corrects mistakes in the bill of quantities, which are departures from the rules for item descriptions and for division of the work into items in the method of measurement, or are due to ambiguities or inconsistencies. Each such correction is a compensation event which may lead to reduced prices. And we will look at one of these later on. So in other words, if there is a mistake in the bill of quantities in relation to measurements or due to ambiguities or inconsistencies, again, we move away from it being a pure remeasure item into it also being a compensation event. Item 60.7, in assessing a compensation event which results from the correction of an inconsistency between the bill of quantities and another document, the contractor is assumed to have taken the bill of quantities as correct. So that is in favour of the contractor. Again, watch out for cheeky Z clauses on that, which might actually reverse that particular clause. So again, I'll just say, repeating myself, we're looking here for, is this particular change, is it purely a remeasure, or is it also a compensation event? Why have I emphasized this so many times? Well, if it's a remeasure, then all you're going to do is use the rates that you've already got in the bill of quantities. It's really straightforward. The quantity goes up from 10 to 13 square meters or whatever it happens to be. If it's also a compensation event, then you've got to use a different valuation method. And I am going to go through this particular clause a few times as we go through the remaining half hour. This is difficult. I will read it out and then we're actually going to work backwards up this particular clause. So 63.13 says, assessments for changed prices for compensation events are in the form of changes to the bill of quantities. All that simply means is your original bill of quantities might last from line 1 to line 1500 in an Excel spreadsheet. And as soon as we've got compensation events, we add in extra lines to the bottom of the bill of quantities. And we have 3 rules here, and you can see I've done a little bit of highlighting. Bullet point 1 says, for the whole or part of a compensation event for work not yet done, and for which there is an item in the bill of quantities, the changes are a changed rate, a changed quantity, or a changed lump sum. Bullet point 2, for the whole or part of a compensation event for work not yet done, and for which there is no item in the bill of quantities, the change is a new priced item which, unless the project manager and the contractor agree otherwise, is compiled in accordance with the method of measurement. So item 2, we're just going to measure that and add particular rates on top. Item 3, for the whole or part of a compensation event for work already done, the change is a new lump sum item. So you would just have at the bottom of the bill of quantities item and a lump sum. Last sentence. If the project manager and the contractor agree, rates and lump sums may be used to assess a compensation event. Right, I said I was going to work bottom up here. The first rule is the last sentence. If you, the contractor, and the project manager can agree to use the rates and the lump sums to assess the compensation event, brilliant. Okay, you use them. If you can't agree to use rates and lump sums, then unfortunately we are going to have to go back to defined cost. And my view, and the view of many other commentators, is that for the other 3 bullet points here, for all 3 of them, you are going to use defined cost because of the rule at the bottom. Now, working upwards, if the work is done, for that work that's already done, you're on defined cost. The second one, if the work is not done and there's no item in the bill of quantities, again, you're going to use defined cost in relation to the rate, but you're going to do it using the method of measurement. The first bullet point, I have literally typed here, this for me was the head scratcher. I'm thinking to myself, well, hang on, how is there a difference between item 1 and item 2 if there is an item or if there isn't an item in the bill of quantities? Well, regardless of whether there is or isn't an item in the bill of quantities, my view is that you still have to use defined cost. And the reason for that is you can only use the rates and lump sums, the bottom line. You can only use the rates and lump sums if the parties, project manager and contractor, agree. Okay. So as soon as anything in relation to option B means that you want to claim more or less money, you are always going to do it on a defined cost basis unless it is only a remeasure item. We are going to come back to that again. Let's think of a couple of example changes. First of all, in terms of the principle, and yeah, I've really chickened out here. This is a very easy example. We're talking here about CCTV cameras. They are measured in the bill of quantities, and the bill of quantities states CCTV cameras type ABC, 14 number at £270 each, gives us £3,780. And I've got 4 scenarios that we're going to look at. So the bill says 14. Scenario 1 says the existing drawings actually showed 16 cameras. What do we do with that one? Number 2, existing drawings actually showed 13 cameras type ABC. What do we do with that one? Item 3, there's a revised drawing issued by the employer. These updated drawings add a further 3 CCTV cameras type ABC. And then the final one, quite simply, the bill of quantities was incorrect. Actually, yeah, there were 14 cameras, but it's type ABD, not ABC. Let's start by looking at the principles. And again, as a reminder, we're splitting these into, is it just a remeasure or is it also a compensation event? So the straightforward one where somebody couldn't count past 14, we're clear from earlier that the price for the work done to date from the definition is the quantity completed multiplied by the rate. So therefore the contractor is clearly entitled to payment for the undermeasure against the original bill of quantities. Is it also a CE? Possibly. 60.4 could apply, but only if it is substantial enough. Do you remember the 0.5% rule? I'm kind of guessing that 2 extra cameras is not going to bring you up within that particular substantial rule. 60.5 is a possibility, but I'm probably thinking it's unlikely. 60.5 only applies if the final total quantity and the original quantity means that completion is delayed. Okay, it's possible, but I would say overall, unlikely that this scenario number 1 would be a CE. So quite simply, it is just picked up on the measure, and there's nothing more to do. You just simply change the 14 to 16 and job is good. Scenario 2. Contractor follows the existing drawings and installs 13. Well, this is actually very, very similar to the last one. The contractor is entitled to be paid the price for the work done to date, the quantity completed multiplied by the rate. So the contractor is paid for the work that's actually done. It's not a CE, it's no relevant clauses, it's just picked up on the measure. Probably just annoying for the contractor that it means that the price has just gone down overall for the project, but it's only 270 quid. So 2 easy ones to start us off. Item 3, a revised drawing issued by the employer, and the updated drawings adds a further 3 camera type ABC. We're clear from earlier that the price for the work done to date is the quantity completed multiplied by the rate. So the contractor is clearly entitled to payment. But is this also a CE? Well, yes, it is under core clause 60.1 brackets 1. The project manager gives an instruction changing the works information. Of course, I'm assuming that the works information originally showed 14 and the updated version now shows 17. Final one. The bill of quantities was actually just incorrect. It wasn't 14 cameras type ABC. It's 14 cameras type ABD. This can't just be a remeasure item because it's a different type of camera. So what are the relevant main option clauses to look at here? I have to say, I think it's unlikely it's going to fall into 60.4, this substantial category. Again, the 0.5%. It could fall into the delay category if it's on a long lead-in. It will fall into the category of 60.6 because it will be a compensation event because we've got a clear error in the description. And of course, 60.7 confirms if there is a correction of an inconsistency between the bill and another document, the contractor is assumed to have taken the bill of quantities as correct. Now, what I would want to do in terms of evaluating this, if I just ignore the NEC for a moment, is say to myself, well, ABC camera is 100 quid, ABD is 110, I want another £10 per camera, plus I want an overhead on top. But actually, that is not how the NEC works at all. So once we've established the principle as to whether it fits into the remeasure category or the compensation event category, we then have to look at this issue of assessment. Again, if it's only a remeasure item, you're just simply going to use the rates. And the clauses you'd look at here are 11.228 and 60.4. If the change, however, is a CE, then you need to apply the appropriate rules. And of course, the starting point is this 63.13. This is the slide that I already went through in detail before. Do you remember we worked bottom up? If the parties agree, rates and lump sums can be used. Otherwise, we're going to be looking at changes to the bill of quantities. Whether the work is not yet done or whether the work is done, we are going to have to move into this area of defined cost if the parties can't agree to use the rates and lump sums that already exist. So that 63.13 is vital to actually understand what you do to the bill of quantities. Define cost. We already mentioned this. Oh, sorry. One thing I've missed here in terms of the guidance notes. When we're looking at this 63.13, the guidance notes are actually very helpful. Let me briefly read this out. It says, the bill of quantities will require amendments in the form of deletion, addition, or revision of quantities or items or rates and lump sums. The changes to the bill of quantities should clearly be referenced. The changed bill of quantities, now we saw that definition earlier, 11.221, which takes account of the effect of the compensation event is then used for subsequent assessments of the price for the work done to date. So you update the bill of quantities, and that then is used for the next month. The second paragraph for me is really important here. It says rates and lump sums from the bill of quantities or from any other source may be used to assess compensation events instead of defined cost plus fee if the project manager and the contractor agree to both the principle and the rates to be used. If they are unable to agree, then defined cost plus fee is used. So that exactly follows the description I made earlier of 6313. You need to split this into, is it just remeasure or is it a compensation event? If it's a compensation event and the parties agree, you can use a rate. If the parties don't agree, we're back onto defined cost. The guidance notes helpfully say that the use of rates may apply particularly to smaller compensation events where the calculations based on defined cost may be unduly lengthy in relation to the value of the compensation event. So if you can't use the bill of quantities, then how are you going to price the compensation event? Back to NEC Basics and Core Clause 63.1. The changes to the prices are assessed as the effect of the compensation event upon the actual defined cost of the work already done, the forecast defined cost of the work not yet done, and of course, the fee on top. I also want to highlight here 52.1 as well. All the contractor's costs which are not included in defined cost are treated as included in the fee. Defined cost includes only amounts calculated using rates and percentages stated in contract data, and other amounts at open market or competitively tendered prices, with deductions for all discounts and taxes which can be recovered. Jumping across to 11.2.22, we already looked at this one. Defined cost, again, is the cost of the components in the shorter schedule, whether the work is subcontracted or not. Now, of course, the shorter schedule of cost components is contained towards the back of the contract. And in brief, you need to organise your costs under the following headings. So you have people costs who are directly employed and working in the working areas, or not directly employed but paid on a time basis. So the extra time taken to purchase the cameras and fix the cameras and do the wiring to the cameras. Equipment, do you need a bit of scaffolding? Is the scaffolding hired or is it owned? If it's owned, open market rates, but if it's purchased for the project, then we're looking at depreciation. Accommodation, temporary works fall under this definition. For cameras, possibly not. Plant and materials, we're looking at the purchased plant and material costs, and of course, delivery charges would form part of that as well. Charges, temporary water, electricity supplies, etc. You don't add on the actual bills. You have a people overhead that's applied to the people cost. Then we've got manufacture, fabrication, and design as well. Importantly, any cost component not in the schedule of cost components and is not a subcontract payment is deemed to be included in the fee, such as corporate head office overheads and profit, employees while they're working from the office so they're not in the working area, insurance premiums, and disallowed costs. Percentages. The bit that we're looking at today is the bit in yellow. So I am expecting to see a direct fee, a subcontracted fee percentage, people overheads, adjustment for equipment, and design overheads on top. So they, of course, should have been put into your contract data part 2. Going back to our examples. Do you remember we started off with 14 and my example number 1? The contractor installs 16 CCTV cameras, exactly the same type. Well, this isn't a CE, it's simply caught by the remeasure. So this is a very easy adjustment to make. Ditto item 2, only 13 are installed, not 16. So again, it's not a compensation event and it's caught by the remeasure. The other two examples, I'm sure everybody now is exactly the same as me and just wants to cry, because you don't do the simple thing of using the rates here. It's a compensation event and you have to go down the route of defined cost. 6313 is very helpful. The guidance notes is very helpful. So unless the contractor and the project manager agree to use the rates, you've got to go down that route of the shorter schedule of cost components. Just to make you cry and to include this slide 3 times, there it is again. I am sure that they could have come up with something far simpler than what is written there. Something quite simply along the lines of, if it's a compensation event, you are paid on the basis of defined cost unless you can agree to use rates and lump sums. The complication here for me is a little bit of a step too far in this contract. Summary. If there is an undermeasure or overmeasure, use the rates in the bill unless it's a compensation event. If it is a compensation event, you are down the route of defined cost unless the contractor and project manager agree to use rates. Now, I am going to say that's not quite the end of the story. Don't forget the following. Notification. If the particular change is a compensation event, you will lose your rights if you fail to comply with the notification clause. The unamended NEC main contract gives the contractor 8 weeks to confirm that something has or hasn't happened. But remember, that period of time is often altered. And before stop people typing, yes, I do know, of course, that when it's a change to the works information, which is an instruction that comes from the project manager, under the unamended contract, of course, it's not your duty to actually give the notice, but remember that is often Z-claused. We've concentrated today on the financial side, and we have gone for a very, very easy example to look at. But you must also consider an entitlement to an extension of time as the result of a compensation event and your prolongation of costs as well. Unless camera type ABD is on an awful long lead in, I think that's unlikely. And then finally, watch those pesky Z clauses. Everything could be different under your contract. I thought I'd just add this in, NEC4, because there does seem as if now the vast majority of new contracts which aren't under a framework are under NEC4 rather than NEC3. There is the possibility under NEC3, clause 6313 for the contractor and project manager to agree to use the rate is deleted, and that's now under NEC4, clause 6315. So that's a big change from what we've talked about today. The contractor should be including people rates as part of their tender, which of course is going to make defined cost much easier. The other thing I'm pointing out here is there is only one fee. The other fees, people overheads, they're all gone. It is with nervousness and trepidation that I say, and I'm quite early for a change here, unfortunately. Any questions? Can I say these are not going to be easy ones? I'm hoping Gemma is around to do her fancy. Oh, she's, look at this already. Oh, here we go. Right. If you forecast a compensation event based on rates with quantities, and the quantities turn out to be incorrect later and no assumption has been given, would you remeasure these, or is this at the risk of the contractor to take on with pricing of the sea? Thank you, Chris. I think I can do this one. Right, let me just roll back a little bit here in time. If the only thing that has changed is that it's a remeasure item, so I'll say first of all that it's not a CE, okay? It's just on a remeasure. Of course, if it's on a remeasure, you just get paid what you've done, and we don't have to worry about all that forecasting nonsense. If it is also a compensation event, though, I think we are, what to say, mixing metaphors here. What you shouldn't be doing here, unless the contractor and the project manager agree, you shouldn't be forecasting it on rates with quantities. Of course, you should be forecasting it based on, here we go again, defined cost and then into the schedule, shorter schedule of cost components. So as soon as you say it's remeasure, well, you just get paid what you've done. Easy. If it's a compensation event, you get one shot to put together your costs for the CE, and you must do it on the basis of defined cost. I would expect a project manager who actually accepted agreement on rates, okay, in that particular situation, that actually you would be stuck with the quantities that were agreed as part of the agreement to do this based on rates. Chris, if you hadn't actually reached the implementation stage, if it hadn't been agreed, then I think it is possible to actually revisit, because you've agreed to do it on rates. And I think at that point, you should be doing it on the actual quantities installed. If you've actually agreed or implemented the CE, I think it's too late. Okay, Gemma. Oh, there is another one. Okay, what is my position with regard to time-related prelims in the bill of quantities? As an example, there's a longer duration taken by the contractor to complete, and a lump sum is allowed for a risk item that doesn't actually occur. Does the price for the work to date apply? Brian, that is a fabulous, difficult question. Thank you. Which one will I go for first? I wouldn't expect there to be, let's say, an item for accommodation and 20 weeks with a weekly rate for the accommodation. That would be an unusual thing. But if there is, then I'd have to go back to the measurement rules and see if that is actually a remeasurement item. My gut instinct, and I'm a bit more familiar with SMM7 than the other ones, my gut instinct is that is not a remeasure item. So the fact it's a longer or indeed a shorter duration that's taken by the contractor, I don't think that that's actually a remeasurable item. What I would expect to see on that is if I walk back to contract data part 2, unless there was an amendment added in there below the stated method of measurement. So if it says, however, time-related prelims are going to be £5,000 a week or £10,000 a week. The second one, do you know, I've actually had a scenario with this. The bill of quantities said that the subcontractor or contractor had to include a 24-hour security guard, and that was priced on a weekly basis, and then the contractor didn't provide the security guard. My view on an option B was it wasn't a risk item. The fact is that they hadn't provided the security guard. It didn't jump into the price for the work done to date, and therefore didn't fall into the valuations. So Brian, you're right that the price for the work done to date does apply. On item 2, if it's a lump sum that doesn't occur, I don't think the contractor's entitled to it. So the contractor has to be extraordinarily careful about pricing, and I'm going to say particularly prelim type items, if they've got no intention of providing them. If this particular contractor against this 24-hour security had put a nil against it, then of course the amount of security guards that were provided would have also been nil, and there wouldn't have been an adjustment there. Thank you, Brian. Oh, God, give me a break. Here's number 3. Thank you, Gemma. Okay, and thank you, Leanne. In example 2, where a contractor uses a bill of quantities to purchase materials and is therefore over-ordered from what is included in the works information, who carries this risk? Right, my view is that you only use the bill of quantities for payment. You should always be building to, in the olden days, the drawings and spec. You should only be building to nowadays what's in the works information or NEC4 in the scope. My view, Leanne, is that if there is a spare camera left over, that actually that is the contractors, and they cannot include that within their claim. So that's not good news for the contractors in relation to your question, Leanne. Gemma, I'm here and my fingers are crossed. Please let that be the last one.
We have one more for you, Geraldine.
Go for it, go on. Yeah.
And I think Daniel started writing this at the start of the webinar.
Yeah.
Because it's quite long. So
okay,
one
right.
last question.
Okay, I'm taking a deep breath here. Right. Okay, thank you, Daniel, for scenario 5. I only chose the easy ones, you know. Okay, works information and the bill says 14. Contractor installs 16 because the works information also gives a performance requirement that the camera coverage should be X. Right, okay. In order to meet the requirement, 16 cameras are required. Assume this depends on whether the contractor has design responsibility. If there's no design responsibility, this is an ambiguity in the works information that needs resolving by the PM, which should be to the contractor's advantage. The party that didn't produce the bill, the contractor gets paid for 16. Daniel, I actually think you have got this absolutely right. Let's just roll on this. I don't think that the design responsibility is important here. Think back to that definition of the price for the work done to date. Okay. You get paid for what you have done. Okay. What I would want here is a belt and braces approach of the contractor writing to the project manager and pointing out this particular error. And I would actually go to a clarification from the project manager. The project manager writes back and says, you've got to go with the performance requirement, and therefore lines 11 and 12 on page 271 of the works information is crossed out. It's not 14 at all. You could actually say that's a change in the works information under 60.1 brackets 1, and therefore it is routed, unfortunately, then through the compensation event regime. Or alternatively, you could just say on this one, it's just a remeasure. My view would be the contractor would get paid for the 16 on the basis of what you said there, Daniel.
That's it.
Oh, thank you.
Don't just on the longest one.
Don't let them type anymore, Gemma. I'm ahead of time and everything, and I've gotten through this. I have to say that was one of the harder sessions that I've done, and a very, very thank you for everyone who managed to stay on board for this long. Much appreciated.
I'll try and frighten you, but I don't think this is actually a question. I think this is what everyone would like to say.
That's it, Brian. Yeah. Thank you. I like that. Cheers. That sounds good to me. Brilliant.
Thank you very